The winter of 1944 was colder than most in Harlem. The night air had a bite to it that made even the toughest men shiver. Harlem had always been a world of its own laws, its own rhythm, its own politics. But this night, something was different. The streets hummed with a tension that hadn't been felt in years. Bumpy Johnson, Harlem's reigning king, paced in the shadows of a narrow alleyway, his breath visible in the cold air, eyes scanning the corner of 125th Street. He'd been here before, countless times in the back rooms, the darkened clubs, making deals, setting up his empire. But tonight, something else was at play. The Mafia, those Italians who had come to the city and made their own name, were making their move. The men Bumpy had once considered allies were now his enemies. The Sicilian Mafia, led by none other than Lucky Luciano and his network, had long eyed Harlem's streets, its riches, its power. But Bumpy had fought them off for years, building his own empire, making sure the Mafia stayed at bay. Tonight, however, was different. Tonight, they were no longer just trying to expand their reach. They were coming for him, for his throne. As the footsteps echoed down the street, Bumpy's hand instinctively went to his waist, feeling the weight of the gun tucked there. He didn't need to draw it. He wasn't worried about the fight itself. He had been through worse, seen men fall at his feet, begged for mercy. But this was different. This wasn't just about taking control of a block or a corner. This was about something far bigger. Respect, loyalty, and power. Power that Bumpy had fought for, bled for, and now would kill for. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man dressed in a dark fedora, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his overcoat. The man paused, eyeing Bumpy. The two men exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the battle that was about to unfold. "You think you can keep Harlem, Bumpy?" The man's voice was thick with an Italian accent, sharp and loaded with venom. "You've been playing in our backyard long enough. You know how this ends." Bumpy's lips curled into a faint smile. "I don't think you understand, my friend," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 1,000 street fights. "You don't get to take what's mine." The man laughed, stepping closer, and as he did, Bumpy's eyes narrowed. The game had begun. Bumpy Johnson was no stranger to power. Born in Charleston, South Carolina, he had come to Harlem with nothing but his street smarts and an unbreakable will to survive. By the late 1930s, Harlem had already become a thriving center of culture, jazz, and life, but it was also a hotbed of crime. Gangs ran the streets, the police were either corrupt or powerless, and the city's underworld was as dynamic as it was dangerous. Bumpy had carved out his niche in this world of chaos, starting with small-time hustles before ascending to become one of the most powerful men in the Harlem underworld. By 1944, Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He was a king, commanding respect from every corner of the city. His rise wasn't just due to his ruthlessness. It was his intelligence, his understanding of the game that made him a formidable figure. But as his power grew, so did the forces that sought to challenge it. The Mafia had long been trying to infiltrate Harlem, seeing the potential for profit in the booming streets of the city. Bumpy had successfully held them at bay for years, making sure that the Mafia's reach never extended into his turf. He had kept them out of Harlem by keeping them on the defensive, using his network of informants, enforcers, and allies to counter every move they made. But the Mafia was patient. They knew that to truly take control of Harlem, they would need to destroy the man who had made it his own, Bumpy Johnson. They weren't just fighting for control, they were fighting for a legacy. And in 1944, that fight would come to a head. It started with small incursions, drug shipments disappearing, rival gangs moving in on territory Bumpy had long controlled. At first, Bumpy dismissed it as small-time stuff, just the usual petty squabbles of the streets. But then, things began to escalate. Men who had once been loyal to him started taking sides with the Mafia. His trusted lieutenants began disappearing one by one. Rumors spread like wildfire. It wasn't just a fight for territory anymore. It was a full-scale war for the soul of Harlem. The final straw came when one of Bumpy's closest allies, a man named George, was found murdered, his body dumped in a street corner like a discarded piece of trash. Word on the street was that the Mafia had gotten to him, offering him a deal too sweet to refuse. They had promised him power, protection, and money in exchange for turning on Bumpy. It was a message, a warning. Bumpy knew what had to be done. He couldn't let this stand. Harlem was his, and no one was going to take it from him. He gathered his men in a back room of one of his most trusted hideouts, a place known only to those loyal to him. The room was tense with silence as Bumpy paced back and forth, his mind racing. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating, preparing. He'd been through countless confrontations, but this was different. The Mafia wasn't a street gang. They had resources, connections, and influence beyond what Bumpy could imagine. But Bumpy was no stranger to adversity. He'd fought and survived wars far bigger than this one. "I'm not going down without a fight," Bumpy said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of a king who had seen it all. "We'll hit them where it hurts. We'll take the fight to them. Let them know Harlem is still mine." His men nodded, ready to follow him into the fight. They had seen the power of Bumpy Johnson, his ability to command, to inspire fear, and to build a legacy that was as solid as any fortress. "Let's go to war," Bumpy said, his voice as sharp as the blade of a knife. The streets of Harlem had never felt so alive with tension. By the time Bumpy and his men made their move, the news had spread like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson wasn't going to let the Mafia take his turf without a fight. In the shadows, men whispered, unsure of who to trust. The streets that had once belonged to him now seemed to buzz with fear. The Italian Mafia had come, and they were here to take it all. Bumpy's first move was to hit them where it hurt. A shipment of alcohol loaded with the Mafia's best products was arriving from the docks that night. Bumpy's men were stationed in key spots, waiting for the signal. As the trucks made their way toward the warehouse, they were ambushed. Cars screeching to a halt, guns drawn, and the night air filled with the sound of gunfire. The Mafia had no time to react. When the dust settled, Bumpy stood at the center of the chaos, his men securing the alcohol shipment while the Mafia's associates lay in a heap, pinned down and disarmed. A few had been shot, others left bruised and battered, but Bumpy had made a point. It wasn't just about the money, it was about sending a message. "You come to Harlem thinking you can take what's mine," Bumpy said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "You take what's ours, and you'll pay for it." One of the men who had survived the skirmish tried to make a run for it, but Bumpy stopped him with a single gesture. His eyes were cold, unfeeling as the man stumbled to his feet. "You'll regret this," the man spat, his voice weak. Bumpy didn't flinch. "No, you'll regret it when the world sees who runs Harlem. And it's not you, or your bosses." He turned and walked away, his men following in tow, as the echoes of the confrontation rippled through the city like a shockwave. But the Mafia wasn't about to let this insult slide. They were organized, ruthless, and they knew the value of retaliation. The next few weeks saw a wave of violence and sabotage, small acts meant to destabilize Bumpy's operations. Fires set to his warehouses, shipments sabotaged, and men on his payroll turned up dead, executed without mercy. But Bumpy didn't flinch. Each move the Mafia made, he responded with double the force. The final confrontation was set for a cold night in December. Bumpy had gotten word that the Mafia was holding a secret meeting at one of their hidden locations, an old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. It was a place where deals were made in silence, where power was exchanged in the dark. Bumpy, always one step ahead, had his own plans. He knew that the Mafia was vulnerable in these quiet moments of power. He had sent word to his men to infiltrate the building and prepare for the inevitable. As Bumpy approached the warehouse, he could feel the weight of the moment on his shoulders. This wasn't just about power, it was about survival. The Mafia had crossed a line, and Bumpy had no intention of letting them take his empire. He stood in the shadows, watching as the men from the Italian Mafia moved in and out of the building. They were confident, perhaps too confident. They thought they controlled the game in Harlem. They thought wrong. The moment came. Bumpy's men stormed the warehouse, bursting through the doors, guns drawn. The Mafia was caught completely off guard. A firefight erupted immediately, bullets flying, chaos reigning. The air was thick with smoke, the sharp scent of gunpowder filling the room as the two sides clashed. In the middle of the battle, Bumpy saw one of the Mafia's top men, a notorious enforcer known as Salvatore "Sal" Moretti. Bumpy had dealt with Sal before, but never on this scale. This was the man who had orchestrated much of the violence against Bumpy's crew. The man who had thought he could kill Bumpy's empire from the inside. Bumpy made his way through the carnage, eyes fixed on Sal. He could hear the man yelling, barking orders at his men, trying to maintain control. But Bumpy was relentless. He reached Sal, who was trying to make a desperate escape through the back exit. Before Sal could even react, Bumpy's hand shot out, grabbing him by the collar and slamming him against the cold brick wall. "Did you really think you could take Harlem from me?" Bumpy's voice was cold, each word deliberate, full of the weight of years of struggle. Sal's face twisted in anger and fear. "You're nothing, Johnson. The Mafia runs this town. You can't stop us." Bumpy's grip tightened. "I'm not going anywhere." With one swift motion, Bumpy raised his gun and fired, ending Sal's life right there in the darkness of the warehouse. The Mafia's grip on Harlem, once so sure and unyielding, had finally been broken. The aftermath of that night was swift and unforgiving. Word spread through Harlem like wildfire. Bumpy Johnson had just destroyed the Mafia's strongest hold on the city. It was the kind of blow that would echo through the streets for years to come. The Italians, seeing their prized enforcer taken out so publicly, had no choice but to retreat. Harlem had made it clear that it would not fall under their rule. Bumpy's victory was more than just a personal triumph. It was a message to anyone who thought they could take his place. He wasn't just a kingpin in Harlem. He was a symbol of defiance. But the victory came at a cost. Bumpy had lost men, and the streets were still filled with tension. Retaliation was always lurking in the shadows. Yet, despite everything, the respect Bumpy had gained that night was undeniable. His power had only grown, and Harlem's streets had never felt safer or more dangerous for those who dared to challenge him. In the years that followed, Bumpy's reputation grew. He didn't just rule Harlem, he shaped it. The streets that once belonged to the Italian Mafia were now firmly under his control. Those who had once thought him an outsider now saw him as the ruler of the city. The respect he earned that night wasn't just for the violence, but for the courage and the wisdom he displayed in the face of overwhelming odds. He had gone to war with the Mafia and emerged victorious. Bumpy Johnson's name became synonymous with power, respect, and resilience. The legend of the man who stood up to the Mafia and won spread far beyond Harlem. It became a story told in whispers, a tale of a man who refused to bow to anyone. For the people of Harlem, Bumpy wasn't just a gangster, he was a symbol of strength. He was a man who had fought, not only for power, but for the very soul of the streets he had claimed as his own. Bumpy Johnson's war with the Mafia wasn't just a battle for territory, it was a fight for respect, for control, and for the heart of Harlem. When the Mafia thought they could take what was his, Bumpy proved them wrong. His legacy wasn't just built on fear, it was built on the respect he commanded and the loyalty he earned. In the end, Bumpy Johnson didn't just conquer the Mafia, he became a legend, a king of Harlem who stood tall in the face of every challenge. As the years went on, his story would live on in the streets he had ruled, a reminder of the power of one man's will and the lasting impact of defiance against the odds.